Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode, we bring latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this episode, we catch up with Teagasc Better Farm Sheep Programme participant Des Powell, who's run a mixed beef and sheep system in County Tipperary. Des is joined in this episode by Dr. Frank Campion, and we discuss Des's plans to increase flock size and the kind of breeding policy he's implementing on his farm. With lambing already on the way in the flock, Des discusses how he's selecting and identifying his replacements, and Frank highlights the challenges of expanding from within the flock and how it can limit selection initially. We'll discuss some infrastructure changes on the farm in the past year, and we finish up discussing the current grass situation this spring and what changes Des has implemented to bring this about. We start off, however, with Des giving us a bit of background to his farm and the system he's running.
Running at the moment 260 ewes and 40 ewe lamb replacements. I had hoped to keep more, and I'm going to keep those hoggets that didn't go on lamb. There's 29 of them. I'll keep them as well. And then on the beef side of the house, I bring in about 30 to 40 calves in spring, and then I topped it up to about 70 weanlings in the end of the year, and then keep them for a year winter, and then I keep them for my second winter, and then I'm in the Hereford Prime, so the whiteheads will go to the ABC factory, and the rest of them go into the market stores, and that's pretty much the lie of the land.
So it's a mixed sheep and beef system. You're also a member of the Better Farm Sheep Programme, and I know as part of that, there's one of your aims in it is really to push your system on a bit more. What are a couple of key changes you're hoping to make, maybe starting in terms of number-wise in the farm?
Yeah, the main target at the moment is to put those ewe numbers up to around the 400 mark, and so that's this year's real focus. So with Frank's help there, we identified the best ewes that I've got from performance, and I put anyone that was a white went with Suffolk, and anyone that was a Suffolk breed went back with a Belclare. And hopefully with those, that will help drive numbers up. My prolificity is probably a bit too low, so I'm using the Belclare to try and bring a bit more numbers into the flock.
So it's a combination of driving numbers up and trying to get the output from the ewes up as well in the same time. And look, it's a bit of a challenge to do that in a short period. Frank, I might bring you in on this one. There's a challenge in any farm where you try and increase numbers and increase output and all at one time. It's multifaceted. So it is, but it takes a number of years to do that.
Yeah, that's the thing here. It does take a couple of years. It's not an overnight thing that's going to happen. Des will tell you that himself, and he's a living proof of that. He's a couple of years out trying to build the own numbers now, and we went from a situation of about 170 ewes the first year. There's 260 ewes plus the 40 ewe lambs to lamb this year. And there's challenges in that insofar as we're trying to pick our ewe lambs from within the flock because we want to keep those genetics in. Des has mentioned that he's using his Belclare and his Suffolk, so he has a defined breeding policy there. He wants those genetics coming through, but ultimately then that's going to limit us somewhat into the amount that we can keep. The amount of ewe lambs that haven't coming through every year. So it takes a number of years to build them up, and it just, I suppose, we start off the first couple of years and we're, any 30 ewe lambs that are hitting the weight targets and are, healthy and we're happy to keep, we're keeping. And then as we get up towards the numbers, we can probably become more selective. And that's something Des is starting to push back towards now as he's slowly beginning to get enough ewe lambs every year that he has an option there to pick from.
And I might tease on out with you a bit more in a moment. Like Des, part of this process started for you, and you've just started lambing as well, but part of this process for you started last October. You mentioned earlier just a simple division within the type of ewes you're mating to each of the different crosses. You're looking for that Suffolk Belclare ewe ultimately. So just take us back a wee bit, like group-wise, what kind of rams did you put out this October?
So we put out Belclare and Suffolk, with the ewe lambs got Charlie. Generally speaking, I got about 50 to get 100, or what I called my best girls, the best ewes. They got 50 of them were picked out to go to the best players I had, and then the best of a lot of them are Belclare ewes that were ewe lambs that bought in as well. They went to the Suffolk, so that gave me my 100 sort of best girls that I could get, and those best ewes would then be crossed back in. I'm going to tag their ewe lambs. So if they're twins, they get a red tag, and if they're out of a Balclair, they'll get a green tag on. So I can track that through the system later on.
I'm thinking that kind of catches up to where we are at the moment with that as well. There's like the ones you picked in, obviously you have a different mark put on them ewes. I know your EID recording and it's done digitally as well, but you're at the stage now where you're actually starting to identify these lambs. You mentioned the discs and the tags. So just for the listeners, like you're tagging your lambs at birth, the management disc, just take us through it again, how you're using that.
Yeah, actually, I'm doing both because obviously when you're in the middle of lambing, you can be a bit dopey. So I tag and I use the alert on the handheld. So that alert will tell me whether if it's a Balclair ram or an alert saying that it's Suffolk. And only on the ones that I selected of those 100, so 50-50. And then when I also have those ewes marked in the back of their neck, so I can see it as well. And then if I have twins in front of me, for example, I can then say if it's a twin, I put a red tag in the right hand ear, and if it's out of a Balclair or a Balclair ram, for example, and I want to keep it, I'll put a green tag in its left ear as a management tag. Those are just colored discs, and that makes immediately then when I'm drafting them over the summer, I can see that coming down the race. I can say, okay, that's the one I want to keep.
So
provided she scores well, but she's a good lamb afterwards.
Like you touched on something important there, but you have the two means of identifying them. They're all electronically recorded for the mating groups on your handheld software, but you've also that physical mark there as well, which is sometimes a very simple tool that can be used on farms. The other thing you touched on there, I think it's very useful at this stage of the year. You're really going for the maximum number you can possibly keep based on genetics at the moment, and whatever you decide to cut out. But that this tag or a tag mark on them at this stage is one way of identifying them as the year progresses, and you're continually culling back, I assume, Des, as the year continues on that one.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is just giving me a pool that I can draft from, and then I'll know immediately. I can look at that ewe lamb and say, oh, I know her background, and then after that, if she does perform well, I can then say, okay, I'll keep that one as a replacement.
And Frank, just to bring you back in here on this one, not all of them ewe lambs, despite the genetics, might be suitable. We'll often talk about not keeping lambs from ewes who are difficult lambers or poor mothering ability at that stage. Some of the things you won't see maybe back in October. How does that fit in with that criteria? Like when you're expanding and trying to get maximum numbers, how hard can you really go on culling in them scenarios?
Yeah, so you're dead right here, and Des has pointed out very well there insofar as, not every ewe lamb that's born to one of these ewes is going to make the cut at lambing time, and by the time we get to the summer when we're picking them, some of them aren't going to be good enough ewe lambs we want to keep. I suppose in an ideal situation, we'd be at the story where, look, if we had a ewe lamb born to a ewe that did something to displease us at this stage of the year in terms of poor milk, bad mother, etc., we wouldn't put the disc in them. We'd say, look, we're not going to keep her because we can see from her mother that there might be some issues. But I think when you're building the numbers, you probably have to be slightly more lenient on some of those issues.
There's a balancing act.
Exactly. You have to focus. The first thing is the lamb has to be a fit and proper lamb for breeding, and you might just have to focus on that for the first year or two till you get the numbers up. And then once you have your numbers and you have a good enough pool of lambs to pick from, then you start bringing in the rest of the criteria.
Look, it's a bit of an effort in terms of identifying them at this stage, but in the long-term picture of it, we've seen benefits before in flocks like this from doing that simple identification and tagging at this stage. Look, obviously, it's okay talking about open output and open numbers. The rest of the system has to match in terms of facilities, housing. Otherwise, I know, Des, you've done some work on increasing your housing at the moment. The other big aspect of that is really matching your grassland to it. So just maybe for our listeners, take us through, what was a couple of big changes you made from a grass point of view so far, and what are the plans going forward?
Well, one of the things that has helped is I increased my roads. So I have a road now, which means that I would often be sort of forced to carry stock in certain fields at the tail end of the winter or the tail end of the autumn, and I could keep them further away from the house because I was able to get to them. And that has meant that there's some good grass being able to keep. I closed earlier, and I had a better cover across the whole farm. That was one thing that obviously then I'm measuring grass. It's become a new pastime that I'm trying to learn from that a lot more and learn from sort of what that means, and I'm tracking my rotations more closely and really get down to see to get that performance measured, which is something we never did here before, and I'm starting to enjoy it actually, to sort of get something out of that and get a better return.
Better management supply. Look at that whole improving access is always a valuable investment. Like just in terms of managing covers and measuring, look, it's been a difficult enough spring for most. You've recently completed an opening cover. Look, you're lambing at the moment, so you're obviously turning stock out to it. How are you grass-wise this spring?
Pretty good. Now, obviously the sun's shining today, and I'm trying to get fertilizer out in the next as soon as I can. But there's a good cover there, and I hopefully can. I'll split as they go out. I'll put the singles out in one mob, and then I'll split the twins, and then I'll keep the triplets near the house. The few that I have, I'll try and wet foster them. And
Frank, just like that, managing the groups, turnout and setting up your grazing groups. In Des's case, you know, he chose to keep the singles separate. Others will probably split maybe an age first. That approach is sometimes farm specific. Maybe just allude to it there. Like in Des's, why is the single split from the twins maybe more suitable for him?
Yeah, look at it. That's exactly it, Kieran. It's probably farm specific. We would usually be saying split on age is the easiest, most practical way to do it. In Des's case, it's just the farm is slightly fragmented, and I suppose one of the areas is what will be kind of high, a little bit exposed, and it just suits better to throw the singles out to that flock. You know, it helps to spread out the flock a bit. It's easier to manage them. It probably wouldn't be suitable for letting twins up to, particularly in the early stages just after lambing. So it's just a case of, you know, looking at what way the farm is set up and setting up the groups to match that.
A slightly more exposed sighting, I think.
Yeah, that's the exact word. It's slightly more exposed.
So just as aside from the singles, and Frank has pointed out why they're grazing in that area, any triplet Joes or particularly them ewe lambs, how are you managing them as a grazing group?
Well, the triplets I do in general. I had good success last year with wet fostering. Invariably at the start, as we are now, there's usually a few that kind of get in. I had triplets before I got many to foster them onto, so I will have a few, but I'll keep them near the house, and they'll join the ewe lambs, so they'll be mobbed together with the ewe lambs and given a bit of extra attention near the house.
Bit of extra feed for them. It's just to bulk up that group as well.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Look, that all the changes in grassland, like obviously access and managing is important. Des, in terms of paddocking or splitting as the year progresses, has that changed that by previous practice for you?
Yeah, massively. Because I've put in new roads, and a lot of the fields were much bigger, and now I've split them. But I should say I split them, a lot of them with tape as well, so that there's also, I tried, obviously silage ground I've kept it as large as possible, but I've intentionally made it very easy that I've put in a lot of water troughs and a lot of electric points, so I can easily connect my white tape to split big fields pretty fast. So that's a big difference what it used to be. And
there's obviously benefits there for the cattle enterprise on a farm as well. Like it's another time investment that has dual benefits.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, with the roads, another thing that has happened because of them is from a labour perspective, I can move animals onto a road, and there's no everybody can just, there's only one way home, that everybody can just follow the path back, the roads back, and that's a huge win for me, because a lot of the work I'm doing here on my own, and having that rather than having to need a crowd to try and move stuff around, it makes it a lot easier. That's another side effect of added attention to paddocks and roads and so on.
Look at something often overlooked, but it's a very valid point.
I think, Kieran, on you know, with Des's case, it all boils down to putting in the infrastructure around grazing. So, you know, Des mentioned earlier, which is really important, that his closing plan has worked much better last October. That's why he's on target this year. He has enough grass to turn out to, you know, provided things stay going the way they are. He gets out a bit of fertilizer this week. He's bang on where he needs to be. You know, every farm is different in terms of what they need in infrastructure, you know, be that fencing or whatever it is, that you can better manage your grass and actually, you know, manage it in the way you need to get the most out of it during the year.
It's something we talked about in a recent podcast with Philip as well. Like fertilizer has been delayed in other farms, but the kick of getting that closing right is really this spring, where you can see them covers have accumulated, and you have that safety net there for a year like we've had this year.
Exactly. You know, we're seeing that on all the better farms. You know, you see the effects of the closing plan. You do see it. It's now when you see it, you know, and it might be hard to believe it for some lads in October, November, when you're telling them you have to have on X amount closed by such and such a date. But when you're standing here on the 1st of March on the Point of Lambing, and you see that the grass is there, you say, yeah, well, look at that, here's the benefit of it. And that's what you have to bear in mind next autumn when you go to start closing up and setting up your grass for the spring.
Yeah, as the song says, I'm a believer, because we've never had as good a cover at this time of the year. Normally we'd have let sheep eat it, and this year with your help, we've been much more disciplined about keeping stock off, closing up earlier, and it's the difference today is chalk and cheese compared to prior years.
Seen is certainly believing. Des, I'm very conscious you've already started lambing, and we've held you up for a bit of your time already. We better let you get back to it. Look, thanks very much for joining us today. I'm certain we'll be catching up with you again in the near future.
Thanks, guys.
We're going to finish things up at this point. Again, I'd like to thank both Des and Frank for joining us. It's good getting an update on where Des is at, and he's in the early phase of expansion in his flock. I'm sure we'll catch up with him at a later stage to see how he's progressing. Like all the farms in the Better Farm programme, there will be a monthly update available in the Teagasc Sheep Newsletter. We'll try and feature them on the podcast as we go through the season. That's it for me for this episode. Again, for any updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye on the Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and listen in to any of our episodes.